Hello Spokane, this is Aaron Farr, and I'm here with Krista Farr as well.
Hey guys.
And today our guest is Joel Tampien. We're super excited to chat with him about a topic that means a lot to me and an area that I'm looking to grow in, so hopefully you guys can gain a lot from it. Joel is the co-founder, CEO of 4 Degrees Real Estate, amongst other things that he'll share. That is the brokerage that Chris and I work at. Joel and his family are also very close friends of ours. So I'm going to kick it over to you, Joel, to just give us a little highlight reel
Hi,
of
Joel.
who you are.
Hey, what's up, guys? Hey, I really appreciate this opportunity. I think it's a pleasure to be able to have a conversation with you guys. So try to keep it under 2 minutes. Born and raised Moses Lake in a bubble, the smallest bubble you can imagine. Went to a school with all my cousins. As soon as I graduated high school, went to another bubble, a little bit bigger. It was called Whitworth University. A couple of my siblings I followed them there. So I went to college with the anticipation of, I guess, becoming a teacher. Really, I got my education degree. And then from there, really bursted that bubble by joining the military. And I think a lot of the conversation that we talk about today, when we talk leadership, a lot of it is founded in what I learned seven-ish years active duty in the military, and then transitioning into what we do today. So piece of that is the 4 Degrees, the brokerage. Obviously, you guys know a lot about that. Maybe we get into a little bit of that, but more so talking about leadership, I think, specifically. So,
Yeah, the reason I asked Joel to speak on leadership today is because he's somebody that I look up to in this area. He happens to be a very strong leader. So to get this started, I want to ask, why do you even think leadership is an important thing? Why is it important to be a good leader?
So in order to answer that specific question, I think it's important that I define for you what leadership is, at least for me specifically. And this is stolen straight out of the military FMs, and we won't go deep into that because that'll put everybody to sleep. But it's simply put, the providing purpose, direction, and motivation to a group of people to accomplish a common mission or task. So really, you're providing vision. You're unifying a group of people to do something that maybe they didn't ever think was possible. So you're elevating, you're the conduit to help them elevate their game. And I think that's something that's super important, especially, this day and age when there's so much disconnect between people. Really, I think leadership brings that unity to the group of people to be able to drive forward and once again, like I said, do things that maybe they never thought were possible, but also do things that they're extremely proud of too. And I think that's a fantastic thing for everyone to be able to experience.
Sure.
Yeah.
So getting into more of the leadership, were you influenced or inspired by somebody to really kind of take on that role of being a leader?
Yeah, I think it's, in that 2-minute clip that I just gave, there's a lot of different elements that happen throughout that, or a lot of different people who are influential in my life. And what's funny is to think back, there were a ton of people growing up, like in the high school years, where there was maybe an event that happened, or I saw them act a certain way. And at the time, I didn't really know how to articulate it or how to necessarily get myself going in that same direction. But then today I can think back and say, wow, what a powerful influence that individual was in my life and in my journey. And then also it probably started more so when I joined the military. I was kind of thrown into the fire. And, my first job was being an executive officer of a 230 soldier company. And you're in charge of all training and operations. You're in charge of the health and the welfare of those soldiers. And so I had the opportunity to be thrown into that. And then really, I think what came out of that is the refinement of what I saw myself kind of becoming in the leadership role. And so I think that's something that obviously was kind of like the foundation, but then moving forward, that's the kind of content, I guess, that I'd like to continue to share with people today.
For sure.
Yeah.
So one thing I always think about with you is specifically, one thing I always think of you about you specifically is that you're a leader in the military, you're a leader in business, you're a leader of your family, and those are all different, I think, but there's got to be a common thread through all three of those things.
Yeah.
Something that is important in all three of those different areas.
Yeah. So for me, it's my faith. And you guys know that. you know me well enough to know that I'm a Christian. And for me, that is the foundation of who I am and how I operate. And so even when you go back to the definition, purpose, direction, and motivation, well, my relationship with Jesus Christ does that. And so when I have something that's unshakable and immovable like that, then it gives me the confidence then to do that outside of that realm, essentially. So now I have, basically this relationship that assists me in that. And now I'm looking to help other people. And it's not necessarily that, you're trying to convert them to have that same faith, but it's much more, they can see that I operate a lot differently, that I'm, I move with that sense of purpose and direction and, that optimism that creates the motivation amongst a group of people. So I would say that's probably my foundation for sure.
I think that's really cool, because I just think at 4 Degrees, like you're super open about your faith, you're confident about it, but clearly not every employee at 4 Degrees or agent at 4 Degrees is a Christian, but they all seem to really respect you and respect your belief. And you don't necessarily put that on them. Like you said, not everyone has to be a Christian. Not everyone, needs to believe what you believe, but you treat them the same way anyway.
Yeah, and I think what's awesome about that is I try to stay very objective about it. Like you said, I'm not going to try and ram it down somebody's throat, but the same things apply. When you say leader for your family, leader in the military, leader at 4 Degrees, leader, wherever, well, it comes back to those, how do I create purpose, direction, and motivation for those individuals that are potentially under my influence or within my sphere? How do I help them do that?
Sure.
And so that's ultimately what it comes down to. And I think, I talk to the leaders at that specific organization and others that I'm a part of, is it's all done out of love. And so you have to really build those relationships with people, get that credibility, make those deposits into their life. So then that way you can actually have the opportunity to have those hard conversations with people. And I think that means a lot for those folks.
For sure. So let's say somebody is put into that role, kind of like you were thrown into the role of being a leader of 230 soldiers. Let's say there's somebody listening today who is put into that role unexpectedly, and now they're asked to lead a team or a group of people within their organization or at church or at home or whatever. What's a piece of advice that you would give somebody in that situation who's scared or nervous or feels like they're going to fail at being a leader? What's something that you think would help them?
Yeah, and I guess I kind of dissect that question of if they were thrown into it, did a part of them want to do it? So that I'm going to go off of that assumption. There's a part of them that actually wants to lead people. And so I think what's important through that is that they understand that they're continually learning. Like, I think obviously it's awesome that you guys see me as a leader. I appreciate that. But I'm somebody who is continually learning. And you guys know the pace at which I read books. And so we won't disclose that for the audience. But it is still important that I continue to learn and refine my leadership skills, just like for that individual. And so I think probably one book that has been very impactful for me is a book called Extreme Ownership. And what's interesting is it's a very foreign concept in the civilian world. In the military, it's relatively known, I think, amongst good leaders or good mentors. But the concept is that you own everything under your influence or around you. So what I think it does is if someone has never had that thought or that concept, it might be a paradigm shift for them at first, but once they get to the point where they truly take ownership of everything that happens or fails to happen within their world, essentially, and they own it, well, then it's going to start to change their world. It's going to start to change those who they're wanting to lead, and also those people are going to want to follow them. Yeah. And so once again, it gets into kind of the art behind leading and within some of those topics. But I think that's a huge one, is continuing to learn how to lead properly. So surrounding yourself with people who you see are good leaders, and not being afraid to go out and ask them, hey, would you mind being my mentor or my coach? And I think you can use those coach, mentor, and leader. I think you can sometimes use those interchangeably. Yeah. But I think, it's something that number one, you want to do. And then number two, you gotta get out there and take that step.
Sure.
So.
Yeah, I recently read that book, and it was highly impactful. Just in our real estate business, so often things happen.
Mm-hmm.
It's very common in the real estate industry, and there's so many people involved. You know, there's a real estate agent, there's closers, there's lenders, there's inspectors. There's just so many things that can go wrong, and they ultimately usually fall on the agent because they're kind of leading the transaction, and it can be difficult to take ownership of things going wrong when you didn't do anything.
Yeah.
It was out of your hands.
Yeah.
And then there's times in the past I can remember like putting the blame on somebody else with, you know, letting the client know, hey, this wasn't my fault. This was so-and-so's fault. And it really didn't feel good and it didn't come off well. And then there's been times in recent history where you just own it. Like the book encourages, like you just, you take the fall for the team. And you say, you just apologize and tell them you'll do better. And it's amazing how the reaction's so much different when you do that. They appreciate that. They appreciate the honesty, I guess, and just.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think what's interesting too is it's important that a young leader realizes that you will take the responsibility for things that go wrong and give the credit for things that go right. So one thing that was told to me in the military very early on is being a leader is a very lonely place.
Agreed.
Because, and you guys know this, right? You're at the top of your organization or wherever you're at. You have to make hard decisions. You have to find a way to make relationships without being too close, but you want to be close enough to where you can have influence and impact in their lives. So it just creates this dynamic that you have to know going into. It's going to be lonely and it's going to be hard, right? And so sometimes people just don't think about that when they say, I want to be a leader because maybe I get paid more, or I want to, move up the ranks because I get paid more. Yeah. And I want to be seen as the one who's getting it all done, when in reality, it should be the opposite.
Sure.
When things go bad, it's on you because it's within your control. If things go well, you get that time to praise your team, and I guarantee you that's gonna create buy-in with your team. It's gonna create them wanting to do more than just what their job description says they should do. They're gonna want to go above and beyond.
Sure.
Yeah.
So talking more a little bit about team, because being a leader, obviously you're not a leader of one, you're a leader of a team. How important is it in a workplace or an organization for a team? Where do you see the value in that? Because I know that's a big part of your organization, 4 Degrees, is that team mentality and environment.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's a couple pieces to that. Number one, the mission at 4 Degrees or tied in with the purpose is to create positive impacts in our community, whatever we're doing. And so when I think about that, well, if it's just me, I can create some positive impact. But if there's 105 of us, we'll think about how much more positive impact we can make as an organization. So that's kind of where that boils to, and understanding that everybody is an ambassador. So I think, when it comes into within the organization, within the building, I know just, based off of stories and things that I've talked to other people about, how important it is to have everybody on the same page. So unity.
Yep.
How do we create unity in an environment, a world that we live in right now that is just naturally throwing wedges into everybody's scenario? It doesn't matter if you're talking about work, church life, any other social environment that you're a part of. And so that's where I almost take it as like a personal challenge in some ways, where it's like, that's not happening here, right? And so that's what, those are some of the elements though that people see come out when there is a discrepancy. It doesn't stay for a full day. We're addressing it and we're having conversations, and you guys have been in the office. That's why I have a Kleenex box. You have those hard conversations with people and you allow them to work through it. And then we as a team find a common ground. It's just like, marriage.
Yeah.
You got to work at it, right? It's really hard, and every day you have to be committed to fight. And so I tell my team that all the time is I appreciate the heck out of the fact that we're building leaders who are willing to fight versus flight. And I just think people over the course of time, if they hear that enough and they ingest that enough, they start to buy into it enough, well, then now it becomes a part of their life. Sure. Not just in the workplace, but also in their personal lives and their social lives. So that's why I think it's super important.
Yeah. And you can feel it. I mean, when people are a part of something, a team, you can really feel the dynamic and the difference as compared to going into a environment where it's a me mentality. So we really do appreciate that about you.
Oh, yeah. Thanks.
Yeah.
I actually have a 2-part question.
Okay. I didn't bring a pencil, so I'll try and remember.
So you've brought up a couple times, like when you're a leader, you give the credit. You do the best to give the credit to the team, to whoever you're leading. But you also, when things go bad, you might take the fall or take ownership of that. So for those who aren't leaders currently listening to this, why would one want to be a leader? What are the benefits? I mean, that sounds pretty rough,
Yeah.
So as a leader yourself, what kind of benefits or pleasure do you get from being a leader with having to basically give the glory away and make all the hard, difficult decisions and take ownership for things that go wrong?
Yeah, great question. Why would someone want to be a leader?
Oh, and the second
What a
part
great
of the
question.
second part of the question was, do you believe that everyone is meant to be a leader, or do you think that only some are sort of wired for that?
Yeah. So for me, being a leader, I think there's, and it kind of jumps to your second part, but I think there's certain gifts that God has given me specifically, just like he's given all of you, in order to be an impactful leader. Why do I do it? I think it's because I love to see people reach potential that they didn't even think they had. And what's funny, and I won't get too deep in this because it's kind of a rabbit hole, I was the lazy kid growing up, through elementary, high school, that the coaches were constantly yelling at because they would always tell me, Joel, you should be concerned when I'm not yelling at you. Because while I'm yelling at you, it's because I can see you have way more potential than you're actually putting forth or than you're actually performing. And so I didn't realize that back then. And now it's, through certain events in life, I've kind of realized I love that. And so I can attribute that to some of the coaches that I had, specifically my dad throughout my life. And so I love to be able to help people get to the next level. And what I love about that even is there's no cap. I'm not saying level 5 out of 5. It's always the next level. There's always more to improve on. And so I love when people hit those points where, they hit a goal, an annual goal that they didn't think was ever possible before even joining 4 Degrees. And so that, to me, I love being able to say, things like, wow, that's next level stuff right there.
Yeah.
And it gets them to that next, and then there's always this, okay, well, what's next? Like it almost makes them feel like I want to get to that next level. And Joel, I know you can help me define what that looks like and create that path to get there. So I think that's probably a big one. And it is very, very challenging. You guys know that when you lead a team, you're dealing with everybody's emotions all the time, and you're dealing with their personal lives as well as their professional lives. So you do kind of turn into like a counselor a lot of times, but I don't necessarily shy away from that. I think, to answer your second part of your question, I think some people are gifted with certain traits or skills. And so I think there's potential for certain individuals to be maybe more dynamic in leadership, but I also believe that everybody, if committed, could be a potential leader or has potential to be a leader. It might be, this person might have potential to lead a few people. They might have the capacity to lead a couple people. This person might have the capacity to lead thousands of people.
For sure.
And I think it just depends, so I wouldn't be one.
That's really encouraging. I've heard it a couple of times when you've told your backstory, and I'm like, I don't picture this Joel.
Oh yeah, super lazy. Oh man, I love telling that to people. So I always try and tell my story, which I think is a great way to start off connecting with people. Is if I get to hear your story, you hear my story, you start to connect with some similarities, and you start to see why they behave the way they do in a lot of cases. And I love being able to tell new people, like, I am the laziest person you know. Nobody believes it right now. Nobody does. But it's just, that's how, I don't know, I guess I'm wired. And there's a lot of times where, well, you guys have seen me on vacation before. I could totally just sit there, hang out, and put nothing in my mind. And that's how I refill my buckets. So there's just something about it. But it is a conscious effort. So I love talking to actually younger individuals or even family members who are maybe stuck in that they're feeling lazy or they're not sure what to do going forward or things like that. Well, I love just being able to share my story, because I think what it does, they're able to connect to it. It's like, oh, okay, I just need to have that moment or a couple moments in time or string together a couple wins in order to get going in that right direction. And I too could do that, so I think it's good.
And what I appreciate is that you find things in people, and I know this personally, that they might not see in themselves, and that inspires them to think bigger than what they thought as far as leading or even just the person that they are, So I appreciate that. And I think that's really cool that you do that.
Yeah.
So wrapping it up, you are very inspiring. You are a leader. And if anybody on this podcast wanted to find you or maybe connect with you on leadership, where can they find you?
Oh man, you guys know this. I don't do social media. So, 4 Degrees has a social media page. The Wellness Center at North Park has one.
Yep.
My office address, 915 West 2nd Avenue. I'd love,
school.
Just come see me in person. Like, I love to be able to help people, whether they're starting a business or whether they're trying to figure out their next steps or whatever it is. So I love to be able to take time to do that. So any one of those places.
Cool.
Yeah.
Wrapping things up, do you have something like a quote, maybe a piece of inspiration that's just kind of pushed you to become a better leader in your workplace?
Interesting. I have one actually as you're saying that. Yep.
Okay.
So I'm going to throw it on everyone, and I might have to unpack it just a little bit, but the quote or the saying is embrace the suck. Totally military, because you go through a lot of sucky things and you're put in those positions and you persevere. You learn perseverance. You learn how to push through those hard things. And then at the end, when you do, you have the opportunity to look back and be extremely proud of what you and a group of people just accomplished. So if you ever need something, because if you're a young business owner or, someone who's going through a really hard time, it's almost like, okay, I'm going to commit, I'm going to embrace the suck, and then I'm going to take the next step. What's the next step towards progress here?
Awesome.
So,
Good.
Yeah.
Well,
I think I also say that to myself at the gym every morning.
There you go. Yep. It's used everywhere.
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Joel.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure. We learned so much from you. And I know the listeners learned a lot today as well.
Yeah. Thanks,
it was a pleasure to be on here. Thanks for having me.
Yep.